In the small Scottish town of Dunfermline, where stone cottages leaned beneath low grey skies, the sound of hand looms once filled the air. They rattled and groaned like tired animals, weaving cloth for a world that was already beginning to forget them. It was here, in 1835, that a frail boy named Andrew Carnegie was born into a family standing on the edge of disappearance. His father was a weaver in an age that no longer needed weavers. His mother carried the quiet fear of hunger and the stubborn hope that education might still offer a way out. As a child, Carnegie would look beyond the narrow streets of Dunfermline toward the distant waters of the Firth of Forth, imagining a wider world he could not yet name. He could not know that his life would span the most violent transformation of the modern age, from muscle to machine, from iron to steel, from scarcity to unimaginable wealth. This is the story of a man who rose from poverty to become one of the richest individuals in human history, and then did something almost no one else of his class dared to do. He gave his fortune away. Not in secret, but as a declaration, not as charity, but as philosophy. Between 1835 and 1919, Andrew Carnegie stood at the center of forces that reshaped the United States. Steel mills thundered in Pittsburgh, smoke darkened the sky, workers bled in labor conflicts, railways stitched a continent together with iron, and quietly, across towns and cities, libraries rose, temples of knowledge funded by the same hands that once commanded the furnaces. This is not a simple tale of success, nor a gentle story of generosity. It is a paradox forged in fire, ruthless industrial power set against moral responsibility, a life that built America's spine of steel and then asked what such power owed to humanity. If stories like this help you slow down, reflect, and fall asleep with history still echoing in your thoughts, consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment with where you're listening from, and let us know which life from history you'd like to explore next. Chapter 1: Roots of the Weaver. In the early decades of the 19th century, Dunfermline was a town suspended between two eras. Its narrow streets still echoed with the rhythm of handlooms, yet the future was already pressing in, carried on the hiss of steam and the relentless pace of machines. For generations, weaving had been the backbone of this Scottish town, a craft passed quietly from father to son, woven into the identity of the people themselves. Andrew Carnegie was born into this fading world in November 1835. His father, William Carnegie, was a skilled handloom weaver, proud, independent, and deeply attached to his trade. But the Industrial Revolution showed little respect for pride or tradition. Mechanized mills, faster and cheaper, began to erase the need for hand-woven cloth. One by one, looms fell silent. Families who had lived with modest dignity slipped into uncertainty, then into poverty. The Carnegie household felt this change with brutal clarity. Work became irregular, income shrank, meals grew simpler. Yet within this struggle, Andrew absorbed lessons that would shape his entire life. He watched his father wrestle not only with hunger, but with the loss of purpose. The loom was more than a tool, it was identity. When it became obsolete, so too did the world William Carnegie understood. William did not accept this quietly. He was drawn to the Chartist movement, a working-class campaign demanding political reform, voting rights, and dignity for labourers. Meetings were held in small rooms filled with candle smoke and fierce conversation. Young Andrew listened from the edges, learning that poverty was not merely personal failure, but often the result of larger forces beyond one's control. From his father, he inherited a belief that society could be reshaped and that injustice was something to be challenged, not endured. His mother, Margaret Carnegie, embodied a different strength. Practical, determined, and fiercely protective, she took on sewing work to keep the family afloat. Where William represented ideals, Margaret represented survival. She believed above all else in the power of education. Though books were scarce, she encouraged Andrew to read whenever the opportunity arose, convinced that knowledge could open doors no loom ever would. One such door appeared in the form of Colonel James Anderson, a local benefactor who opened his personal library to working boys on Saturday afternoons. For Andrew, this was a revelation. Books became windows into worlds far larger than Dunfermline's grey stone walls. History, science, and philosophy whispered possibilities that poverty could not silence. By the late 1840s, it was clear that Dunfermline could no longer sustain the Carnegie family. The old world was collapsing, and the new one offered no place for a handloom weaver. Across the Atlantic, however, lay America, spoken of in hopeful tones as a land of work, motion, and opportunity. As Andrew prepared to leave Scotland, he carried little in his pockets. But within him were seeds already planted, his father's belief in social responsibility, his mother's faith in discipline and learning, and the quiet understanding that the world was changing and that survival belonged to those who learned to change with it. In the hush of history, the looms of Dunfermline faded. But their lessons travelled with a boy who would one day help shape an industrial age far greater than the one that destroyed them. Chapter 2. Across the Atlantic. In the spring of 1848, the decision could no longer be postponed. Dunfermline's looms had gone quiet, and with them the last hope that the Carnegie family might endure in the world they had known. Across Britain, unrest stirred among the working poor, and opportunity seemed to be receding rather than approaching. For William and Margaret Carnegie, emigration was not a dream of adventure, but an act of necessity. At the age of 13, Andrew Carnegie left Scotland behind. The voyage across the Atlantic was long and unforgiving. The ship carried immigrants crowded together in tight quarters, the air thick with salt, sickness, and anxious expectation. For weeks, the sea stretched endlessly in every direction, separating the old world from the unknown promise of the new. Andrew watched the horizon, absorbing the quiet lesson that survival often required leaving everything familiar behind. When the ship finally reached America, the Carnegie family made their way inland to Allegheny, Pennsylvania, a growing industrial town across the river from Pittsburgh. Here, the air smelled of coal and iron. Smoke drifted constantly above the streets, and the noise of factories replaced the gentler rhythms of the Scottish countryside. America, Andrew quickly learned, was a place in motion, restless, demanding, and indifferent to sentiment. There was no time for adjustment. Within days, Andrew found work as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill. His task was simple but relentless, replacing empty spools beneath the looms as they spun at a merciless pace. For this labor, he earned $1.20 a week. The hours were long, the machines were loud, mistakes were punished not with patience, but with dismissal. In the dim light of the mill, Andrew learned his first American lesson. Work was abundant, but mercy was not. Children labored alongside adults. Fatigue was expected. Silence was survival. Yet even here, in this harsh environment, he observed patterns others ignored. He memorized systems, noticed efficiencies, and listened carefully to conversations meant for older ears. At home, His mother continued to work tirelessly, sewing and taking in boarders to support the family. His father, weakened by years of struggle, found it difficult to adapt to the factory world. The roles within the family began to shift. Responsibility settled heavily on Andrew's young shoulders, and with it came a growing sense of urgency. Despite exhaustion, Andrew did not abandon his hunger for learning. He borrowed books when he could, read by candlelight, and began to understand that knowledge was not a luxury, but a tool, one that could lift a person beyond the noise and dust of the factory floor. Allegheny was not kind, but it was instructive. In the cotton mill, resilience was not taught through encouragement, but through repetition and endurance. Each week's wages were small, yet they carried a powerful message. Survival depended on effort, alertness, and the willingness to move forward without complaint. For Andrew Carnegie, this first job was more than employment. It was a crucible. In the roar of machinery and the rhythm of endless labor, he began to shape the habits that would define his life: discipline, observation, and the quiet belief that even the harshest beginnings could be transformed into something greater. Chapter 3: Telegraph Lines and Opportunity. By the early 1850s, America was learning to speak in electricity. Thin iron wires stretched across fields, rivers, and towns, carrying messages faster than any horse or ship could travel. For a young boy in Allegheny, this invisible language of dots and dashes would become a turning point. Andrew Carnegie was still working long hours when opportunity arrived quietly, almost by accident. He secured a position as a messenger boy at the local telegraph office, a place alive with urgency and motion. Men spoke in clipped tones, paper rustled, needles clicked. Information flowed in steady pulses, shaping decisions that reached far beyond the small room where Andrew stood waiting for instructions. Unlike the cotton mill, the telegraph office rewarded attention rather than strength. Andrew listened. He watched, and soon he began to recognize patterns in the clicking sounds that filled the air. Morse code was not yet written on the page. It was heard, felt, and memorized through rhythm. While others relied on written signals, Andrew trained his ear to understand messages as they arrived, instantly and without translation. Night after night he practiced. He carried the code with him, repeating it in his mind as he walked home through the smoky streets. Slowly, the dots and dashes became words. The words became meaning, and meaning became opportunity. Before long, Andrew was promoted to telegraph operator. He was barely in his teens, yet he now held a position of trust. Messages passed through his hands that moved trains, settled business disputes, and summoned help in moments of crisis. In this role, he saw America in fragments: orders from railroads, reports from distant cities, news of accidents, profits, and loss. The nation revealed itself not as a single story, but as a network of ambitions, risks, and constant motion. The telegraph office became Andrew's classroom. Without formal schooling, he learned the language of commerce, urgency, and precision. Mistakes were costly, speed mattered, accuracy was everything. For the first time, his work connected him directly to power, not political power, but economic power, flowing through wires and words. Just as important were the people he encountered. Supervisors noticed his reliability. Businessmen trusted him with sensitive information. Andrew began to understand that advancement often came not from force, but from competence recognized at the right moment. This was his first true taste of upward mobility. Unlike the factory floor, the telegraph offered a ladder, visible and climbable. Each skill acquired opened another door. Each message received hinted at worlds larger than Allegheny and futures not yet imagined. In the quiet hours after his shift, Andrew would reflect on what he had witnessed. The Telegraph had compressed distance, reshaped time, and rewarded those who could keep pace. America, he realized, belonged to the connected, to those who understood its systems and moved within them with confidence. For Andrew Carnegie, the Telegraph was more than a job. It was a revelation. Through its wires, he glimpsed the architecture of a modern nation and his own place within it, waiting to be claimed. Chapter 4: Railroads and Advancement. In mid-19th century America, the railroad was more than a means of transportation. It was the nation's bloodstream, carrying people, goods, and ambition across vast distances. For Andrew Carnegie, it would become the most important classroom of his early life. His reputation as a skilled telegraph operator brought him to the attention of the Pennsylvania Railroad, one of the most powerful corporations of the era. He was hired as a secretary and telegraph clerk to Thomas A. Scott, a rising executive within the company. The move placed Carnegie at the center of a rapidly expanding enterprise, where decisions made in offices echoed across hundreds of miles of track. Carnegie learned quickly. He observed how schedules were planned, how delays could ripple outward with costly consequences, and how information, accurate and timely, was the true engine of efficiency. Scott became a mentor, exposing him to the mechanics of large-scale management and the logic of capital investment. For the first time, Carnegie was not merely following orders. He was witnessing how power was organized and exercised. Promotion followed responsibility. By his early 20s, Carnegie was appointed superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. The position was extraordinary for someone so young, and the demands were relentless. He oversaw track maintenance, train operations, and crisis response. Derailments, floods, and mechanical failures were part of daily life. When trouble struck, Carnegie was expected to act decisively, often through the night. The railroad years also introduced him to a new idea. Wealth could be made not only through wages, but through ownership. Encouraged by Scott and other associates, Carnegie began to invest his modest savings. His first ventures were cautious but calculated, shares in companies tied directly to the railroad's needs. He invested in the Adams Express Company, in iron bridge construction, and later in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company, whose rail cars transformed long-distance travel. Perhaps most prescient was his involvement in early oil ventures, recognizing that energy, like transportation, would shape the future. These investments did more than increase his income. They taught Carnegie how capital multiplied itself when aligned with growth industries. He began to see patterns. Infrastructure created opportunity, opportunity attracted investment, and investment reshaped society. Yet this period was not without cost. The demands of the railroad strained his health. Long hours and constant pressure led to exhaustion, forcing him to retreat temporarily to recover. The experience left a lasting impression. Success required endurance, but it also carried hidden risks. By the early 1860s, Carnegie stood at a crossroads. He had mastered the systems that powered America's expansion. He understood logistics, management, and capital. Most importantly, he had learned to think beyond wages and toward enterprise. The rails that stretched across the continent carried more than trains. For Andrew Carnegie, they carried a realization. The future belonged to those who built the structures upon which others depended. And he was ready to build something of his own. Chapter 5: The Making of a Titan. By the early 1860s, Andrew Carnegie had learned nearly everything the railroad could teach him. He understood movement, scale, risk, and the quiet authority of capital. America was rebuilding itself in iron and ambition, and Carnegie sensed that the age of small enterprises was giving way to something far larger. The nation needed structures that could bear weight, endure pressure, and span distance, and he intended to supply them. One of his first major steps came with the formation of the Keystone Bridge Company. At the time, wooden bridges still dominated American railways, despite their fragility and frequent collapse. Carnegie saw what others resisted. Iron, and soon steel, were not luxuries, but necessities. Keystone Bridge specialized in iron bridges, capable of carrying heavier loads and surviving harsher conditions. The company prospered as railroads expanded westward, replacing wood with metal, caution with confidence. Carnegie was no longer merely investing, he was building. Alongside Keystone, he assembled a web of related ventures, ironworks, rolling mills, and supply partnerships, each reinforcing the other. He believed deeply in control, not through domination, but through integration. If he could manage the raw materials, the manufacturing process, and the distribution networks, he could reduce costs and outpace competitors who relied on fragmented systems. His interest soon turned decisively towards steel. The Bessemer process, recently introduced from Britain, promised faster and cheaper steel production. Many American industrialists hesitated, wary of its complexity and cost. Carnegie, remembering his father's lost livelihood to hesitation and delay, chose otherwise. He invested heavily, convinced that steel would become the backbone of modern industry. In Pittsburgh, where rivers met coal and iron ore could be transported with relative ease, Carnegie began laying the foundations of what would become a steel empire. He partnered with capable engineers and managers, delegating authority while demanding precision. Profit margins were relentlessly monitored. Inefficiency was eliminated. Innovation was encouraged, but only if it served scale. Financial discipline underpinned every decision. Carnegie reinvested profits rather than indulging in personal luxury. Expansion was funded carefully, often during economic downturns when competitors were weakest. This counter-cyclical strategy allowed his enterprises to grow while others contracted, strengthening his position with each cycle of boom and bust. Yet beneath the calm calculations lay an intense personal drive. Carnegie worked obsessively, driven by the fear of slipping backward and the desire to build something enduring. The lessons of poverty were never far from his thoughts. Wealth, to him, was not yet a moral question, it was a measure of security and influence in a volatile world. By the end of the decade, Carnegie had moved beyond the role of ambitious entrepreneur. He had become an industrial strategist, assembling a machine of production that mirrored the efficiency of the railroads he once managed. Iron bridges gave way to steel structures. Small mills were absorbed into larger systems. Scale became destiny. In the quiet moments, often late at night, Carnegie would reflect on the transformation unfolding around him. America was hardening, its cities rising, its rails extending, its future taking shape in metal. And at the center of this change stood a man who had once replaced bobbins in a cotton mill. The Titan was not yet complete, but the foundations were laid, firm and unyielding, ready to support an empire that would soon redefine industry itself. Chapter 6: Forging the Steel Empire. By the 1870s, steel had become the language of progress. Cities reached higher, railways stretched farther, and nations measured their strength in tonnage and output. Andrew Carnegie understood this shift with uncommon clarity. Iron had built the early industrial age, but steel would define its future, and he was determined to master it completely. Carnegie Steel did not rise by chance. Its ascent was guided by a relentless commitment to efficiency, innovation, and scale. At a time when many manufacturers relied on outdated methods, Carnegie invested aggressively in new technologies. The Bessemer process, refined and adapted for American conditions, allowed molten steel to be produced faster and at lower cost than ever before. Later, the open hearth furnace further improved quality and consistency. Each technological advance was adopted not cautiously, but decisively. Pittsburgh became the heart of this transformation. Its rivers provided transportation, its hills held coal, and nearby iron ore could be delivered by rail and water. Carnegie positioned his mills at the center of these natural advantages, turning geography into strategy. Smoke darkened the skies, and the glow of furnaces lit the night as steel flowed in volumes previously unimaginable. What truly set Carnegie apart, however, was not technology alone, but organization. He believed that control meant survival. Rather than depending on outside suppliers, Carnegie pursued vertical integration, owning every stage of production. He acquired iron ore fields in the Mesabi Range, coal mines in Pennsylvania, fleets of ships on the Great Lakes, and the railroads needed to move materials efficiently. This system allowed costs to be driven relentlessly downward. When markets weakened, Carnegie Steel could reduce prices and still profit, forcing competitors to follow or collapse. During economic downturns, when others cut back, Carnegie expanded. Mills ran continuously, wages were tightly controlled, efficiency became doctrine. Carnegie himself was often absent from the factory floor, preferring long periods of reflection and travel. Yet his influence was unmistakable. He selected capable managers, empowered them with authority, and measured them by results alone. Sentiment played little role in decision-making. Productivity was paramount. For workers, the steel empire was both opportunity and burden. Jobs were plentiful, but conditions were harsh. 12-hour shifts were common, accidents were frequent. The pace of work was dictated by machines that never tired. The steel that strengthened bridges and railways exacted a heavy human cost within the mills themselves. Yet, from a distance, the empire appeared elegant in its logic. Raw materials entered at one end, finished steel emerged at the other, and profits flowed upward with mechanical certainty. Carnegie Steel became the largest and most profitable industrial enterprise of its kind, supplying the backbone of a rapidly modernizing America. By the end of the 19th century, Andrew Carnegie had achieved what few had imagined possible. He controlled not merely factories, but a system, a self-contained organism of extraction, production, and distribution. Steel from his mills framed skyscrapers, reinforced railways, and shaped a nation's physical form. In the quiet hours, far from the roar of furnaces, Carnegie would sometimes reflect on what he had built. The empire was powerful, efficient, and vast, yet even as it expanded, a question lingered, unspoken but persistent. What responsibility did such power carry? The steel empire was forged. Its strength was undeniable, but its moral weight was still being measured. Chapter 7: Homestead and the Clash of Labor. By the early 1890s, the steel empire stood at its peak. Carnegie Steel dominated production, prices were driven ever lower, and America's appetite for steel seemed endless. Yet beneath the roar of furnaces and the glow of molten metal, tension had been building, quietly, steadily, and inevitably. The Homestead Works, located along the Monongahela River near Pittsburgh, was one of Carnegie's most important mills. It was also one of the most heavily unionized. Skilled steel workers there belonged to the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, an organization that had long negotiated wages and conditions. To Carnegie's managers, the union represented an obstacle to efficiency. To the workers, it was protection against exhaustion and injury in an unforgiving industry. In 1892, as contracts came up for renewal, negotiations collapsed. Henry Clay Frick, Carnegie's trusted lieutenant and chairman of Carnegie Steel, resolved to break the union. He announced wage cuts and prepared the mill for confrontation. Fences topped with barbed wire were erected around the plant, transforming a place of work into a fortress. It became known as Fort Frick. Andrew Carnegie was not present. He had retreated to his estate in Scotland, seeking distance and reflection. Yet absence did not mean ignorance. Letters crossed the Atlantic. Strategy was discussed. Authority remained intact. On a dark July morning, violence arrived by river. Frick had hired Pinkerton agents to secure the mill and remove striking workers. As barges approached the Homestead shoreline, armed workers and townspeople confronted them. Shots rang out. Smoke drifted across the water. The clash lasted hours. When it ended, several men lay dead on both sides. The nation watched in shock. Newspapers carried images of bloodied streets and armed guards. What had once been a dispute over wages became a symbol of the widening gulf between labor and capital in industrial America. Soon after, the Pennsylvania state militia arrived, restoring order, but not justice. The strike collapsed. The union was broken. The mill reopened under Carnegie Steel's terms. For Carnegie, the event marked a turning point. Though he publicly expressed regret over the violence, many saw his words as hollow. His belief that wealth carried moral responsibility now stood in stark contrast to the suffering at Homestead. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, preaching benevolence while permitting brutality in the pursuit of profit. The question lingered: how much responsibility did a man bear for actions taken in his name? Carnegie struggled privately with the answer. He had long believed that efficiency served the greater good, that lower steel prices strengthened society as a whole. Yet Homestead exposed the human cost of that logic. The mills ran faster, profits grew, but trust was shattered. For the workers, the defeat was devastating. Long hours and dangerous conditions returned without organized resistance. For organized labor nationwide, Homestead became a cautionary tale, proof that industrial power could overwhelm collective action. As the years passed, Carnegie increasingly turned his attention away from steel and toward ideas. He wrote about wealth, duty, and the obligations of the rich. The memory of Homestead followed him, shaping his thinking even when he did not name it. In the quiet cadence of history, the clash at Homestead echoes softly but persistently. It was not the largest strike, nor the bloodiest conflict of the era, but it revealed a fundamental truth of the industrial age. Progress was not neutral. It chose sides. For Andrew Carnegie, Homestead left a permanent imprint. It stood as a reminder that building an empire required force as well as vision, and that the cost of power could not always be measured in steel alone.
Chapter 8: Gospel of Wealth.
In 1889, as smokestacks rose and fortunes swelled across the industrial world, Andrew Carnegie put his beliefs into words. The essay was titled The Gospel of Wealth, and though its tone was measured and calm, its argument was bold. Wealth, Carnegie declared, was not merely a personal achievement, it was a social responsibility. Carnegie had lived through poverty, abundance, and controversy. He had watched inequality widen as industrial capitalism accelerated. To him, the concentration of wealth was neither entirely virtuous nor entirely evil. It was, he believed, an inevitable outcome of modern society. The moral question lay not in how wealth was accumulated, but in how it was used. In The Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie argued that the rich were trustees, not owners, of their fortunes. Large sums of money, he wrote, should not be hoarded, passed down unchanged to heirs, or distributed as indiscriminate charity. Instead, wealth should be administered during one's lifetime, carefully and intelligently, to improve society as a whole. He rejected the idea of simple handouts. Charity that merely relieved immediate suffering, he warned, risked prolonging dependency. True philanthropy, in his view, should create opportunity. It should help individuals help themselves. Education, access to knowledge, and institutions that elevated the public mind were his preferred tools. The essay reflected both idealism and discipline. Carnegie did not call for equality of outcome, nor did he condemn competition. He believed deeply in merit, effort, and personal responsibility. Yet he also recognized that unchecked accumulation carried dangers for society and for the wealthy themselves. A man who died rich, Carnegie famously wrote, died disgraced. These ideas did not emerge in isolation. They were shaped by years of observation, by the memory of his father's struggles, by the unrest of labor conflicts, and by his own growing discomfort with the scale of his fortune. The Gospel of Wealth was both a justification and a promise, a framework that allowed Carnegie to reconcile power with conscience. The essay quickly gained attention on both sides of the Atlantic. Some praised it as enlightened and humane. Others dismissed it as self-serving, arguing that philanthropy could never compensate for harsh working conditions and suppressed wages. Still, its influence spread. Carnegie had articulated a philosophy that many of the era's wealthy would later adopt, in spirit, if not in full measure. More importantly, he committed himself to action. The Gospel of Wealth was not intended as theory alone, it was a declaration of intent. Carnegie began to plan the systematic distribution of his fortune, focusing on projects that, once established, could sustain themselves without continued aid. In the quiet cadence of bedtime reflection, the essay feels almost meditative. It asks a simple but enduring question: what should be done with more than one needs?
Carnegie's answer was clear. Wealth, like power, was temporary. Its highest purpose was to outlive its owner, not as inheritance, but as opportunity. With The Gospel of Wealth, Andrew Carnegie began to shift from industrial titan to philosophical figure, setting the course for a legacy that would extend far beyond steel.
Chapter 9: A Nation of Steel. By the final decades of the 19th century, steel had become the quiet architect of American life. It framed bridges and skyscrapers, strengthened railways, and reinforced the machinery that powered factories across the continent. The United States was no longer a developing nation. It was an industrial force, and steel was its foundation. This transformation unfolded during what historians would later call the Gilded Age, a period marked by rapid economic growth and striking inequality. Wealth accumulated at unprecedented speed, while cities expanded outward and upward. Beneath the glitter of prosperity lay intense competition, speculation, and volatility. In this environment, industrial empires rose quickly and collapsed just as fast. Carnegie Steel stood at the center of this expansion. Its mills supplied steel rails that replaced iron tracks, enabling heavier trains and longer routes. Its beams supported buildings that reached higher into the sky, reshaping urban skylines. From factories to ships, from infrastructure to armaments, Carnegie Steel became woven into the material fabric of the nation. Competition was fierce. Rival firms fought for contracts, markets, and technological advantage. Many pursued expansion through consolidation, forming trusts and alliances to stabilize prices. Carnegie followed a different path. He believed in dominance through efficiency rather than negotiation. By producing steel at lower cost than anyone else, he forced competitors to match his prices or withdraw. This strategy rewarded scale. Carnegie Steel expanded continuously, absorbing smaller operations and modernizing facilities. During economic downturns, when demand fell and prices dropped, Carnegie often increased production. Losses in the short term were offset by long-term gains as weaker competitors failed and market share shifted. The boom reshaped labor as well. Thousands of immigrants arrived to work in mills and factories, drawn by wages that, though modest, promise survival and possibility. Steel towns grew rapidly, defined by long shifts, industrial noise, and communities bound by shared hardship. The rhythm of life was dictated by the demands of production, not daylight or season. For America, steel represented progress. It symbolized strength, permanence, and modernity, yet it also intensified social tensions. Industrial wealth concentrated power in the hands of a few, while labor unrest simmered below the surface. The same steel that unified the nation physically exposed fractures within its society. From his position at the helm of Carnegie Steel, Andrew Carnegie watched these changes with a mixture of pride and distance. He saw his company as an instrument of national advancement, providing the materials needed for growth. At the same time, he was increasingly aware that industrial success carried consequences beyond balance sheets.
By the turn of the century, Carnegie Steel was the largest and most profitable steel producer in the world. Its success mirrored America's rise on the global stage. The nation of steel had been forged, and with it came both opportunity and contradiction. As the Gilded Age reached its peak, one question lingered in the quiet spaces between triumph and tension. How long could such concentration of power endure, and what would follow when its architect chose to step away? Chapter 10: The Great Sale. At the dawn of the 20th century, Andrew Carnegie stood at the summit of industrial power. Carnegie Steel dominated global production, its mills running day and night, its costs lower than any rivals. Yet even as the empire reached its fullest expression, Carnegie was already preparing to leave it behind. In 1901, the forces of consolidation that had reshaped American industry came to a decisive moment. J.P. Morgan, the era's most influential financier, sought to bring stability to the volatile steel market by uniting its largest producers into a single corporation. His vision was unprecedented in scale, a company that would control the majority of steel production in the United States, smoothing competition through sheer size and capital. Negotiations moved quietly, conducted among a small circle of powerful men. Carnegie, then 65 years old, watched from a distance, calculating not only value but timing. He had long promised himself that he would retire early, leaving business before it consumed the rest of his life. Now, the opportunity had arrived.
The price was staggering. Carnegie agreed to sell Carnegie Steel for approximately $480 million, much of it in bonds. When the final figures were tallied, his personal share amounted to more than $200 million, making him one of the wealthiest individuals the world had ever known. The sale led directly to the formation of United States Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. When Carnegie signed the agreement, there was no public ceremony, no triumphant announcement. The moment passed quietly, almost gently. The empire he had spent decades building changed hands with the stroke of a pen. With the sale complete, Carnegie withdrew from industrial life entirely. He resigned from boards, declined new ventures, and turned his attention to a promise he had made long before: to give away his fortune during his lifetime. Wealth, he believed, was not meant to linger unused. Its purpose was action. Retirement did not mean rest. Instead, Carnegie entered what he considered the most important phase of his life. He organized his philanthropy with the same discipline he had applied to business. Funds were allocated carefully, institutions evaluated rigorously, and projects chosen for their capacity to endure without continual support. Libraries multiplied across cities and small towns. Educational institutions expanded. Foundations were established to support science, peace, and learning. Carnegie approached giving not as generosity alone, but as investment, capital deployed for the improvement of human potential. For the public, the transformation was striking. The man once associated with smoke-filled mills and labor conflict now appeared as a benefactor of knowledge and culture. Critics remained, questioning whether philanthropy could erase the consequences of industrial hardship. Carnegie himself did not claim absolution.
He viewed his actions not as redemption, but as responsibility fulfilled. As the years passed, Carnegie found satisfaction in distance. The clang of steel faded from his daily life, replaced by correspondence, reflection, and the quiet pleasure of seeing institutions take root. The empire had served its purpose. It had built a nation's infrastructure. Now its proceeds would build something less tangible, but perhaps more enduring. In the hush of this transition, history turned a page. The age of Carnegie the industrialist ended. The age of Carnegie the philanthropist began, shaped by a single decisive choice to step away at the height of power.
Chapter 11. Libraries Across the World. After leaving industry behind, Andrew Carnegie turned his attention to a quieter form of construction. No furnaces burned, no rails were laid. Instead, stone by stone, he began building places of silence. Libraries designed to shelter knowledge and invite self-improvement. Carnegie's faith in libraries was deeply personal. As a boy in Allegheny, he had discovered books through a small, privately funded library open to working youths. Those hours among shelves had offered him more than information. They had provided direction. He believed that access to books could awaken ambition in anyone willing to read. Beginning in the late 1880s and accelerating after his retirement, Carnegie funded the construction of more than 2,500 public libraries across the United States, the British Isles, Canada, and beyond. Towns, both large and small, received grants, provided they met certain conditions. The community had to supply the land, commit to maintaining the building, and ensure free access for all. This approach reflected Carnegie's philosophy. He did not wish to give gifts without responsibility. A library, he believed, should be a partnership between benefactor and community. By requiring local commitment, he hoped to ensure that the buildings would be valued, cared for, and actively used. The libraries themselves followed a recognizable style.
Solid, dignified, and welcoming, they often featured broad staircases and large windows, symbols of ascent and transparency. Inscribed above many entrances were simple words emphasizing learning, wisdom, or progress. These were not monuments to Carnegie himself, but to the idea that knowledge belonged to everyone. In cities, Carnegie libraries became centers of civic life. In small towns, they were often the first public institution dedicated solely to education. Children discovered literature. Adults pursued self-study. Immigrants learned the language and customs of their new homes. Quietly, without ceremony, lives were changed. The impact spread far beyond architecture. Public libraries strengthened democratic ideals by offering equal access to information. They supported lifelong learning in an era before widespread formal education. In this sense, Carnegie's libraries became extensions of his belief that opportunity should be earned, but that the tools to earn it should be freely available. Not everyone approved. Some critics argued that libraries could not compensate for industrial exploitation. Others worried that philanthropy allowed wealthy individuals to shape public priorities. Carnegie listened, but remained resolute. He saw libraries not as solutions to every social problem, but as foundations upon which individuals could build their own futures. As years passed, the network of libraries grew into one of the most extensive philanthropic projects in history. Many of the buildings still stand today, continuing their original purpose more than a century later.
In the calm rhythm of bedtime history, these libraries feel almost timeless. They are places where ambition slows, curiosity deepens, and progress takes a quieter form. Through them, Andrew Carnegie left behind something remarkably gentle, a global inheritance of open doors, waiting shelves, and the enduring belief that a book, freely chosen, could change a life. Chapter 12. Education, Peace, and Science. As Andrew Carnegie moved deeper into his philanthropic years, his vision expanded beyond buildings and books. Libraries had opened doors to knowledge, but Carnegie now sought to shape the very systems that produced knowledge itself. Education, scientific discovery, and peace, he believed, were the quiet forces that could guide humanity away from conflict and ignorance. In 1900, he founded the Carnegie Technical Schools in Pittsburgh, an institution created to serve working-class students who sought practical education. Carnegie remembered his own youth, marked by limited schooling and relentless labor. He believed that talent existed everywhere, but opportunity did not. The schools offered training in engineering, science, and applied fields, bridging the gap between manual labor and intellectual pursuit. Over time, this institution evolved into Carnegie Mellon University, one of the world's leading centers of research and innovation. Carnegie's commitment to science took a different form. In 1902, he established the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C. Unlike traditional universities, it was designed to support pure research, work driven by curiosity rather than immediate commercial application. Carnegie trusted scientists to pursue truth wherever it led, free from the pressures of profit or politics. He believed that scientific knowledge, patiently accumulated, would benefit humanity in ways not yet imagined. This faith in rational inquiry extended to his deepest hope, the prevention of war. Having witnessed industrial capacity turn toward destruction, Carnegie became increasingly devoted to peace. In 1910, he founded the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, an organization dedicated to promoting diplomacy, international law, and cooperation among nations. He envisioned a world in which disputes were settled by courts rather than armies. Carnegie's peace efforts were idealistic, shaped by optimism and the belief that progress was irreversible.
He supported international conferences, arbitration treaties, and institutions designed to reduce the likelihood of armed conflict. While critics questioned the practicality of such ideals in a world of competing empires, Carnegie remained convinced that education and understanding could temper human aggression. These institutions reflected a consistent philosophy. Carnegie did not fund individuals directly. He built structures that could endure beyond his lifetime. He trusted experts, valued autonomy, and insisted on accountability. Whether in classrooms, laboratories, or diplomatic halls, his philanthropy aimed to strengthen society's long-term capacity to solve problems. In the soft cadence of reflection, this phase of Carnegie's life appears almost serene. The noise of mills had given way to lecture halls and research papers. The urgency of profit had been replaced by patience and inquiry. Yet, even as he pursued peace and knowledge, the world was changing rapidly. Tensions were rising in Europe. Technology was accelerating. The very science Carnegie supported would soon transform warfare itself. Still, he believed in the arc of improvement. Education would enlighten, science would reveal. Peace, though fragile, could be nurtured. In these institutions, Andrew Carnegie placed his final wager on humanity, not in steel or capital, but in the power of the human mind to learn, to reason, and, ultimately, to choose a better path.
Chapter 13. Private Life, Public Persona. Behind the public figure of Andrew Carnegie, industrial titan, philosopher of wealth, global benefactor, stood a private life shaped by restraint, reflection, and carefully chosen relationships. Fame followed him in his later years, but it never entirely defined him. In 1887, at the age of 51, Carnegie married Louise Whitfield, a woman significantly younger than himself. Their union was quiet and deliberate, marked by mutual respect rather than display. Louise became a steady presence in Carnegie's life, sharing his commitment to philanthropy and providing emotional balance during years of transition. Together, they had one daughter, Margaret, whose future Carnegie carefully considered in light of his belief that excessive inheritance could weaken character. Carnegie's homes reflected his changing priorities. In New York City, he built a grand yet purposeful residence designed not merely for comfort, but for conversation. It became a gathering place for thinkers, writers, and reformers. Among his acquaintances were leading intellectuals of the era, philosophers, scientists, educators, and statesmen, drawn to discussions that often stretched late into the evening. Despite his wealth, Carnegie's personal habits remained relatively modest. He preferred simple routines, long walks, and time for reading and correspondence. Travel, especially to Europe and Scotland, offered him periods of quiet retreat. These journeys allowed him to reflect on the path he had taken and the criticisms that followed him. Public opinion was divided. To admirers, Carnegie was a model of enlightened wealth, proof that capitalism could coexist with conscience. To critics, he remained a symbol of industrial excess, his philanthropy unable to erase the memory of labor conflicts and harsh working conditions. Carnegie listened carefully to both. He did not deny the contradictions in his life, but he refused to be defined by a single chapter. Personal conviction guided his response. He believed that legacy was not fixed by reputation alone, but by lasting impact. What mattered most was not how he was judged in his lifetime, but what endured after it. In social settings, Carnegie was engaging and articulate, capable of both humor and intensity. He enjoyed debate, especially on questions of ethics, education, and international peace. Yet he was also capable of withdrawal, retreating from public life when reflection felt necessary. As bedtime history softens the edges of time, this chapter of Carnegie's life feels intimate and unresolved. The man who had commanded industries now navigated a quieter terrain, balancing praise and criticism, privacy and influence, wealth and restraint. In the space between public acclaim and private doubt, Andrew Carnegie continued to refine his sense of purpose, preparing for a final reckoning not with markets or machines, but with memory itself.
Chapter 14: Controversies and Legacy. As Andrew Carnegie entered the final chapter of his life, the debate over his legacy had already begun. History, like steel, cools slowly. It hardens not from intention, but from consequence. Carnegie's achievements were immense, yet they were shadowed by controversies that refused to fade quietly into the past. Foremost among them was Homestead. The violence of 1892 lingered as a moral reckoning that philanthropy alone could not dissolve. Though Carnegie had not ordered bloodshed directly, his absence during the crisis and his delegation of authority to Henry Clay Frick left an enduring stain on his public image. To many workers and labor advocates, Homestead symbolized the imbalance of power in industrial America, and Carnegie, willingly or not, became one of its faces. Another shadow fell earlier, in 1889, with the Johnstown Flood. The catastrophe occurred when a dam above the Pennsylvania town of Johnstown failed, unleashing a wall of water that killed more than 2,000 people. The dam had been part of a private recreational club, frequented by Carnegie and other wealthy industrialists. Though responsibility was legally diffuse, public outrage was swift. The disaster reinforced criticism that elite privilege often escaped accountability. Together, these events fueled the label robber baron, a term used to describe industrialists who amassed wealth through ruthless competition and exploitation. Critics argued that Carnegie's philanthropy functioned as moral camouflage, softening the image of fortunes built on harsh labor and environmental risk. Carnegie did not ignore these accusations. He acknowledged that industrial capitalism inflicted suffering, but insisted that the broader gains, economic growth, infrastructure, and opportunity, outweighed its costs. His response was not apology, but redirection. If wealth could not be accumulated without consequence, then it must be redistributed with intention. This reasoning continues to divide opinion. Modern observers debate whether philanthropy can meaningfully compensate for structural inequality. Some see Carnegie as a pioneer of responsible wealth, establishing norms later followed by foundations and global donors. Others view his legacy as a cautionary tale, highlighting the limits of private benevolence in addressing public harm. Yet even critics concede the endurance of his institutions. Libraries still serve communities. Universities and research centers continue to expand knowledge. Peace organizations, though challenged by history, persist in their mission. In the quiet tone of reflection, Carnegie's legacy resists simplicity. He was neither villain nor saint, but a product and shaper of his age. His life exposes the tensions at the heart of modern society: progress and exploitation, generosity and power, ambition and responsibility. As the centuries turn, these questions remain unresolved. And perhaps that is Carnegie's truest legacy. Not a final answer, but an enduring debate about what wealth owes to the world that creates it. Chapter 15: Last Years and Death. In the final decade of his life, Andrew Carnegie lived at a slower pace, though his sense of purpose never diminished. The roar of steel mills had long faded from his daily experience,
replaced by letters, meetings, and the steady administration of a fortune already in the process of disappearing. To Carnegie, this was not loss, but fulfillment. He divided his time between residences in New York, Scotland, and Lenox, Massachusetts, where the hills offered quiet and distance from public life. Age softened his routines. Long walks gave way to reflection. Conversations became more deliberate. Yet his commitment to giving remained precise and relentless. Each year, millions of dollars were allocated to libraries, universities, scientific research, and international peace efforts. Carnegie approached philanthropy as a final responsibility, one that demanded clarity rather than emotion. He reviewed proposals carefully, declined many, and insisted on conditions that ensured long-term viability. His goal was not remembrance, but usefulness. Institutions, he believed, should stand on their own long after his name became secondary. The world around him grew increasingly unsettled. The optimism of the late 19th century gave way to rising nationalism and geopolitical tension. In 1914, the outbreak of the First World War struck deeply at Carnegie's belief in rational progress and international cooperation. The conflict did not alter his convictions, but it tempered them with sorrow. Peace, he realized, was not guaranteed by good intentions alone. Despite declining health, Carnegie continued to correspond with leaders, educators, and reformers. He remained intellectually engaged, even as physical strength waned. Those close to him described a man at peace with his choices, though not blind to their complexity. He had built, destroyed, and redistributed on a scale few could comprehend. On August 11, 1919, Andrew Carnegie died at his home in Lenox at the age of 83. His passing was quiet, marked not by ceremony, but by reflection. News of his death traveled across continents, carried not by telegraph wires he once mastered, but by the institutions that bore his influence. By the time of his death, Carnegie had given away approximately 90% of his wealth. More than $350 million had been distributed to causes he believed would elevate human potential. Libraries, universities, foundations, and research centers stood as evidence of his intent to transform private fortune into public benefit. There was no single monument to contain his legacy. It existed instead in thousands of places. A child reading beneath a library lamp, a student learning to engineer a bridge, a scientist pursuing knowledge without immediate reward. In the quiet tone of bedtime history, Carnegie's final years feel almost gentle. The life that began in the shadow of a failing loom ended in deliberate generosity.
Steel had shaped his rise, but it was restraint that defined his end.
As the century turned, Andrew Carnegie slipped into history, not as a man of one story, but as a life that embodied the contradictions of modern progress itself.
Epilogue. Andrew Carnegie's life is a study in paradox. Born into the cramped tenements of Dunfermline, Scotland, he began as a boy who knew the sting of poverty and the hum of labouring looms. By the end of his life, he had commanded one of the largest industrial empires the world had ever seen, and had turned the fruits of that empire into institutions of knowledge and opportunity. Steel, which had once defined his power, became the vehicle through which he constructed a legacy far more enduring than factories or wealth alone. The story of Carnegie is, at its heart, the story of movement, across oceans, across social strata, across generations. His journey from immigrant bobbin boy to steel titan mirrors the rise of modern America itself, a nation built on ambition, ingenuity, and relentless drive. Yet Carnegie's legacy is not only the bridges and railways of the Gilded Age,
it is also the libraries that opened minds, the schools that trained minds, and the institutions that nurtured scientific discovery and international peace. In this sense, the steel he forged physically built the nation, while the knowledge he funded built the human spirit. Carnegie's life continues to resonate because it confronts enduring questions about wealth and responsibility. What should those who accumulate great power do with it? How should ambition balance with morality? Carnegie's answer, embodied in The Gospel of Wealth, was that fortune carries an obligation to uplift, to educate, to create opportunity. He believed that the concentration of wealth was inevitable in a capitalist society, but that its purpose could be intentionally redirected for the public good. This philosophy remains a touchstone for modern discussions of philanthropy, social responsibility, and the ethics of capitalism. Yet his life also reminds us of tension and contradiction. Carnegie built his empire amid harsh labor practices and industrial strife. Homestead and other conflicts cast shadows over his moral claims. His story is neither simple nor unambiguous. It is a narrative of power, of choice, and of the imperfect translation of philosophy into action. What endures, however, is his capacity to imagine leverage beyond the factory floor. Carnegie understood that lasting influence is less about personal accumulation and more about the systems one leaves behind. Libraries, universities, scientific institutions, and peace organizations continue to operate decades after his death, reflecting the foresight and intentionality of one man's vision. In the rhythm of bedtime reflection, Carnegie's life invites both admiration and contemplation. It teaches that human progress is neither linear nor inevitable, but that it can be shaped by those who act with discipline, strategy, and conscience. The immigrant boy who once walked the streets of Allegheny understood opportunity in ways that wealth alone could never explain, and transformed it into tools that continue to benefit millions.
The paradox remains. The same hands that once managed furnaces and iron now belong in memory to libraries and lecture halls. The steel that built America's infrastructure also built doors to knowledge. Andrew Carnegie's journey from poverty to power and finally to purposeful giving reminds us that wealth is not merely a measure of what is earned, but of what is entrusted, and that one life, guided by vision and principle, can ripple across time, reshaping society long after the furnaces grow cold.